Welcome back. I'm Kathleen Barnes from Take Charge Books, and with me is Dr. Jim Crawford, author of a fascinating book called A Stroke Was My Teacher. Dr. Crawford was a biomedical researcher for 40 years, was involved in developing many medicines that are common in our world today, and he himself suffered a stroke a few years ago. And using his medical background, he basically made himself his own guinea pig and discovered some things that are pretty contrary to what traditional and conventional medicine today think about stroke. So can you tell us a little bit about how your discoveries have been different from what regular doctors will tell you?
Well, what I have found is that there's really quite a consistent puzzle and pieces to this puzzle that fit together once you start thinking along the lines that dehydration can contribute to stroke and heart attack. When you start thinking along that line, a lot of avenues open up to you to help explain it. But let me back up for a moment and tell you that some of the kinds of things that contribute to my line of thinking stem from the fact that most strokes and heart attacks occur before noon. Now this seems like an innocent enough statement, and it was published by the Framingham study years ago. But nobody has ever written anything about why, to my knowledge. And it's sort of been dismissed. They made the observation, but then walked away from it. And I asked myself, well, why would strokes occur more often in the morning? Well, it turns out if you follow the dehydration path along, you're going to realize that when you go to bed at night and sleep all night long, that when you wake up in the morning, your body is dehydrated and you're going to excrete the fluids that you extracted from your tissues during the night. And this process itself is contributing to increasing the cell concentration, red blood cell concentration. So they're going to be thicker in the morning. And I'm saying that most strokes happen in the morning because that's when your blood is at its highest point of concentration. And secondly, your cortisol level, stress hormone cortisol, is at its peak level at 8 a.m. Now that seems rather odd, but if you stop to remember, historically, many people experience strokes on Monday mornings after they drink their coffee, which in itself is dehydrating, and get their day going with a high cortisol titer, and then that in itself, as I mentioned, will cause red blood cells to constrict. So you've got constricting red blood cells, you've got thickened red blood cells, and these things converge to offer an entirely different mechanism for stroke that nobody has ever described before. And so, to my knowledge, I am the first to offer this concept. And you're not going to find double-blind, placebo-controlled studies here. You're not. This is a common sense approach. It is purely common sense. You have to look at the data and say, well, does this make sense? And I'm saying, well, if what I say does make sense, then you better pay attention to what I'm telling you in terms of dehydration, because it can contribute to so many diseases, and certainly to heart attack and stroke. Get yourself hydrated and keep hydrated. Remain hydrated. So those are the things that come together in my mind that distinguishes my work from anybody else's.
You've come up with a couple of other unique ideas, and one is what you call type C and D embolic strokes.
Yeah, okay.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, I'm saying that the conventional way of thinking about stroke is a clot-based factor moving through your blood. C for clot, so I call that a type C embolic stroke. And I say that there's the second mechanism called dehydration related or type D stroke, embolic stroke. And that is because red blood cells, platelets, are clumped together because of the magnesium deficiency and because of dehydration. So that is the second mechanism, and I'm saying that can account for 30% of all embolic strokes. This is a huge element of stroke that is just not appreciated, not understood, not described, not studied. And that's a pity, because it seems, once you get into it, it seems so obvious. How come I never did think of that? Sort of thing. So I'm just rather sad that it's taken all these years. 50 years, a group of the top-notch scientists have been working on this in the Framingham studies in Massachusetts, and yet they did not even ask themselves the key questions: is what do their data really mean? Such as strokes occur mostly before noon. What does it mean? How can they miss that? Well, anyway, I'm not going to belabor that point, but it's disappointing. Let's just say disappointing.
You also mentioned that viruses could be contributing factors, something as simple as the flu virus.
Absolutely. There are a number of things that cause red blood cells to clump together. Rheumatoid arthritis is an example. Sickle cell anemia is an example. People with sickle cell, mostly the African American, they have an increased risk for stroke. Why? Because they're more vulnerable to sickle cell anemia, and meaning that their blood is already primed to clump together to offer blockages to the heart and the brain. So it makes kind of common sense. And then secondly, we have what is known as the stroke belt in the United States, in which North Carolina here is called a buckle of that belt, because we have so much. And I say, wait a minute, folks, you're trying to find complicated answers to a simple question. In my mind, it's simply a matter that our climate is such that you're going to perspire more in a high humid, high temperature climate, and as a result you're going to dehydrate more rapidly, and I say that's what's behind the stroke belt. Prove me wrong, go ahead, I don't care.
You also mentioned the concept of progressive stroke. How long ago was it you had your stroke?
Well, it's been four and a half years now.
And so what have you noticed about that in your own experience?
Well, I'd say it's hard to say, it's pretty hard to say, is it progressive or am I just becoming more aware of it? But there's no doubt in my mind that I could do a lot more. I was still able to play golf a few weeks after I had my stroke. Now I have a hard time getting around very well at all. In fact, I started using a cane, much to my own I hate it, but I have to. Anyway, that's because either there are more lesions developing in my brain, which I cannot exclude till I have another MRI, and I have not done that. And but that is a distinct possibility. Maybe I have had more occlusions occurring in my brain, where embolisms have developed and migrated to my brain, and maybe they have started some more. I do not know the answer to that. And there's nothing I could do about it if it did happen. So I'm not really, it's not a high priority for me to find out. I'd like to know, but it's not a high priority because there's nothing you can do about it if it has happened. That's the case. So anyway.
And just, a final thing about warning strokes.
Yes.
You've talked about them a couple of times.
Yes.
Let me know, what is your idea of a warning stroke that's different from...
Okay, well, I'm sure glad you asked that question because it's just totally different from what the medical community is saying. The warning stroke, in my opinion, is a matter of a blood vessel that is in spasm. That would account for the fact why it happens very quickly and they don't last long, because the spasm relaxes. And to me, that's just common sense. And by the way, you can have the same thing with a heart as you can have with the brain. You can have a TIA in the heart as well as you can in the brain. I have a family member who has not persistent, but at least occasional elephant on the chest symptoms. And I say to her, look, this sounds just like my strokes, only we're talking about your heart and we're talking about my brain. And so that's what I think. I think it's their vessel spasms due to cortisol, probably. Stress hormones, mostly. And indeed, her symptoms are correlated with stress. I'm her main source of stress.
That's fascinating. We'll continue. Thank you, Dr. Jim Crawford, author of A Stroke Was My Teacher.